Thanks to all of you for joining us today. We've heard some really big ideas, big picture stuff, and now we're going to roll up our sleeves and get into the nitty-gritty. Try to get some specificity and nuance here, and money, most importantly. One of Senator Gillibrand's most favorite topics, grants 101. So we're actually going to start with just some brief remarks from everyone and go down the line here as they talk a little bit more about their offices and their roles. And then we'll have a few quick questions from me, and then we'll turn to the audience. So we're going to start with Commissioner Knight.
Thank you, Gil. And I want to thank Senator Gillibrand and her team for getting us all here together today. I also want to acknowledge my colleague in state government. Can you hear me? Testing? Okay, there you go. So I want to thank Gil for his kind introduction and thank Senator Gillibrand and her team for getting us all here together today. I also want to acknowledge my colleague in state government, Governor Hochul Senior Advisor Shirley Paul, and some of you know Shirley. Shirley, would you stand up? Oh, there she is in the back. And Chris Niebuhr from the Governor's D.C. office is here with us today and can be a resource. Chris, would you stand, please? So this has been a terrific summit, and I'm honored to join you today. I especially want to thank all of you for all of the work that you do. We know that across the state, faith leaders are the pillars of our community, and you're critical partners to the work that we do in economic development, providing guidance and assistance to support small businesses and job seekers across the state. Now, I see many familiar faces and some folks that I don't know, so I want to just tell you a little bit about myself. So Governor Hochul nominated me to be President, CEO, and Commissioner of the state's economic development entity, and I was confirmed by the state Senate last spring. Before that, I spent 2 decades in economic development, especially in underserved communities. Prior to ESD, I served for more than 6 years at the Greater Jamaica Development Corporation in Southeast Queens, one of the oldest economic development agencies in the country. We focused on community building and responsible real estate development to create sustainable economic growth. I also spent 12 years at the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone in Harlem. I served on the New York City Planning Commission and worked internationally in the private sector. What my experience has taught me is that economic development is about opportunity. I share Governor Hochul's commitment to expanding economic development, and it should be at the foundation of ESD's programs, projects, and initiatives. Economic development is how ESD supports the governor in her broader goal in expanding opportunity across the state. Ultimately, ESD's goal is to expand opportunity to businesses across the economy. We strive to bring new jobs and businesses to the state to help strengthen and grow homegrown businesses across New York State. And so you might ask, well, how do we do this? We do this, the majority, through capital grants and tax credits. These resources, which are overseen by the ESD regional offices, are awarded to economic development projects intended to create or retain jobs or increase business in a community. They range in size and scope and are based on the project, but always aim to support catalytic projects that leave a lasting impact in the community. I'll give you an example of one of these businesses. A few years back, we had a women-owned business. It was a catering company that received report from ESD to double its footprint in the Bronx. Today, they are not only a major employer, they're also playing a major role in the community. Their headquarters is in the Bronx, and it's called the Sylvia Center. It's a nonprofit dedicated to teaching nutrition and cooking to children and their families in high potential neighborhoods. And with the onset of COVID-19, the company swung into action to serve others. At one time, they were producing 40,000 weekly meals for the New York City Department of the Aging, delivered to elderly housebound residents, and an additional 100,000 meals weekly for distribution through New York City's Office of Emergency Management. As another example, ESD is working with the National Urban League on their new headquarters in Harlem. That's a project that I worked on about 10 years ago when I was at the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone. The Urban League Empowerment Center will include the Urban Civil Rights Museum experience and the National Urban League Institute for Race, Equity, and Justice, plus housing, office space, and retail. Our capital grant will support construction costs for this impactful project. But ESD doesn't only work with large businesses and organizations. Most of our projects are not the big deals that you read about, but small grants and incentives that support small businesses. 98% of New York's businesses are small businesses and support nearly half of the private sector employment in the state. For many small business owners, it's a path to the American dream. They are the lifeblood of our economy, and ESD has an entire division devoted to the programs and projects that support them. Thanks to Senator Gillibrand and our federal government colleagues, New York was awarded more than $500 million through the State Small Business Credit Initiative, or the SSBCI as we call it. And you have some cards on your table. They're blue cards that you can use a QR code to get some more information about the SSBCI. But this funding supports small business programs with a focus on post-pandemic economic recovery, especially those businesses that are owned by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. With this funding, we've created a series of programs and different initiatives to support different goals. Whether you're contractors looking for capital or innovators looking for venture funding to scale up your business. And we have a tool, as I said, on our website, and if you use that QR code, you can get to it. New York State is also running a $250 million COVID-19 capital cost tax credit program. This program offers businesses support for operating expenses due to the pandemic, like physical barriers, hand sanitizing stations, and software for contactless purchasing. We've also used funding to support greater access to capital, especially businesses who have traditionally faced barriers. ESD provides technical support to small business owners. Business Mentor New York is a web-based program that offers hands-on assistance to help small businesses overcome challenges and grow. We also support 22 entrepreneurial assistance centers, or EACs, throughout the state. They help people looking to open a business, those who recently started a business, or entrepreneurs that are in an early stage of their business. EACs provide instruction and training and one-on-one counseling in various languages to help aspiring entrepreneurs develop the skills to turn their business concepts into reality. I encourage you all to explore all of the resources and help spread the word to the folks in your community. ESD also administers the Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Program. Many of you are familiar with this program and have helped to make it a success. For 20 years, our Division of Minority and Women-Owned Business Development has delivered certification and business development services to the MWBE community to help ensure that they have the tools for them to grow and succeed. We work with other state agencies and authorities to ensure that greater inclusion of MWBs in state contract opportunities are effectuated. New York State has the highest MWBE utilization rate in the country at more than 30%. That means that nearly $3 billion in state contracting has been awarded to MWBEs over the last couple of years. Governor Hochul is committed to lifting up MWBEs and providing the tools to help them thrive. All told, Governor Hochul and ESD is growing economic opportunity across New York State. This is just a snapshot of some of what we do. We have regional offices across the state, and they are the gateway to our programs and projects. They also work with other state agencies and can help you make connections with those agencies. Programs like Securing Communities Against Hate Crimes, administered by the Division of Criminal Justice Services, designed to boost safety and security at places that are at risk of hate crimes or attacks because of the ideology, beliefs, or mission. Ultimately, we want to help businesses grow across the state. There are many ways that we can do this through our different programs and offices. I think together we can get a lot done, and I look forward to working with you and talking about more of our programs.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Knight. Let's give it a hand for her. Next, we're going to hear from Mr. Brent Cohen, Chief of Staff for the Office of Justice Programs at the Department of Justice.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all. Really grateful to the Senator for hosting this and for the invitation for us to join and present a bit about the work that we're doing at the Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs. Actually, before I jump into a little bit about OJP, I want to echo where Commissioner Knight began as well, and just speak to the importance of collaboration and recognizing the key partners that we have here in the room. And at OJP in particular, we acknowledge and are striving for continued partnership with community organizations, community members, clergy, and particularly recognize that the leadership so many of you and your field have played for decades, if not longer, even when the justice system has not always been responsive, and that the leadership has been in the community. And so we are grateful for the work that you all have done and continue to do, and look forward to partnering with you and enhancing what that partnership looks like on our end. I'll say so. I'm Brent Cohen. I'm Chief of Staff at the Office of Justice Programs. We are the primary grant-making component of the Department of Justice, and our work primarily focuses on providing grant funding, research, and training and technical assistance to state and local community partners. That is the focus of our work. We have 6 program offices within OJP, just to give you a sense for structure. One is the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which funds law enforcement and community organizations alike. Another is the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, which, as the name suggests, focuses on young people, those who have come into contact with or at risk of coming into contact with the juvenile justice system, and is led by an administrator who is really focused on reducing that contact. And when that contact between a young person and the justice system happens, making it as fair and beneficial as humanly possible, recognizing, again, that hasn't always been the case. New York has been a leader in this regard. And in fact, before I came to DC, I was proud to work in New York City government, where with so much of your support, we're able to realign the juvenile justice system so that we shrank the number of kids who were in the system and provided community-based, community-focused services and interventions, as opposed to the larger prison-like facilities that existed previously. And so that's a model and some of the work that OJJDP is focused on. We also have the Office for Victims of Crime, which provides grant funding, services, and training and technical assistance to support those who are survivors of violence and other types of crime. And significant formula grant funding goes out to the states, which then gets sub-granted to communities and localities. And happy to talk more about that in that process as well. And then we have the 2 science agencies. So the National Institute of Justice, which does research and helps document what has been shown to work so that can be replicated and duplicated and built upon. And the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is the data or statistics agency within the department. And finally, we have the SMART office, which is responsible for implementing the Adam Walsh Act and elements of sex offender monitoring and tracking. So that just gives you a high-level structure of what it is. I will say I've been back at the department for about a year now, and Gil, I pulled up my stopwatch trying to be really conscientious of time, and then I forgot to press start. So you let me know when I've gone over time. I was this close to being on it.
A for effort.
So we have several goals at OJP right now under this administration. I've been back about 1.5 years. I had worked here once before in the Obama administration. We believe that we can and should advance community safety, that people have a right to be safe in their communities, and we can advance equity simultaneously. That equity includes system reform. It also includes access to federal funding from our office, recognizing that there have been and continue to be barriers to that access. And so that's how we approach this, recognizing we have dual missions here that are not mutually exclusive, but in fact go hand in hand as we look to enhance and further develop the trust between justice system and communities. There are just a couple of quick grant programs, because I know people really care about the money. And so I'll share a little bit about that in timeline, and then happy to answer questions when we come to that. Community Violence Intervention, or Community-Based Violence Intervention and Prevention Initiative, which has been funded at $100 million the last 2 years in FY22, again at FY23, and there are at least $50 million funded for 24, 25, and 26, thanks to the leadership of Senator Gillibrand and so many others for the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. This funding invests in communities as co-producers of public safety. So in addition to supporting law enforcement, investing in communities as co-producers of public safety, recognizing that organizations, credible messengers, hospital-based interventions can engage those most at risk of being involved in a shooting, either as a shooter or as someone likely to be shot. And we know it's often a small number of people who make up a large number of gun violence in a community. And so this invests in those community-based organizations as much as possible. And this is, again, a place where clergy have been particularly prominent in doing this work and engaging folks directly. And so that solicitation will be back out on the street for fiscal year 23, likely this spring in March or April. I'll mention one more and then I'll pass the mic, or actually two more. I lied. So one is Reimagining Justice, where, again, it was a new pilot program. It's actually out of Newark. So it's too bad Senator Booker left, because I could have shared that. But it's in Newark, and what they're doing is investing in community-based organizations by providing the same type of data that law enforcement agencies get. So community organizations and community members are intervening in violence and helping to respond to those tears in social fabric that may not require law enforcement response, but they don't have access to the same information that police do. And what this project is looking to do is to provide that type of information in order to elevate community members as co-producers of public safety. And the third one I'll mention, which I'm sure some of you have been involved in the past, is Second Chance Act, which is really focused on reentry. So a lot of what I've been talking about is stopping violence before it starts, or thinking about how do we respond to those small tears in social fabric that justice system involvement really isn't necessary for. And then there's folks who have gone into the deep end of the system. They've gone through the correction system, and they're coming home. 95% of people are coming home. What does it look like to help someone successfully come home? That reentry process. And the Second Chance Act has consistently provided funding through grants through our office to do that. And those, again, will be, a lot of those grants will be going out this spring for fiscal year 23. So with that, I will cede the floor and look forward to a conversation.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Cohen. Let's give it up for Mr. Cohen. We promised nuance, and we heard about a lot of specific programs there. Please follow up with us if you want to learn more, or if there was about opportunities on how to connect you with Mr. Cohen and how our office can help. Well, my cards are right here. We'll be around. Next, we're going to hear from Mr. Elson Nash, the director of the School Choice and Improvement Program Division at the Department of Justice, and the interesting work going on there.
Sure. So once again, Elson Nash, Director of School Choice and Improvement Programs at the U.S. Department of Education. That agency or the division is host to full-service community schools, our Fostering Diversity Initiative, magnet schools, Promise Neighborhoods, the DC Opportunity Scholarship Programs, and the statewide Family Engagement Centers. The programs that are most applicable to you in nonprofits and faith-based institutions. And it is a key program that Senator Gillibrand and others have stood up. It's a key program that is related to the Biden-Harris administration. It's called the Full Service Community Schools Program. Now, we just announced 2 weeks ago grants totaling $63 million here in the District of Columbia. At the same time, when Congress passed our budget, we now have $75 million available. You, as nonprofit and faith-based institutions, have the opportunity to apply for these grants. This is a key program that you all need to listen to and be a part of, because many of you are connected to your schools or have schools that you have created. So what's important about this program? So as I mentioned, this program has a grant. The budget for the grants are $75 million for startups. So if this is something that you want to develop, we call them capacity building grants. The top line of those capacity building grants are $500,000 each year for 5 years. The key thing here that you all need to be aware of is your partnership with your local schools and your local school district. So I'll say it again, and this is what many of you do. You need to partner with your local schools and your local school district, 2 or more schools. You all do that. So the key thing here is how you set up that partnership. You, as nonprofits and faith-based organizations, can actually serve as the fiscal agents. What did I just say? You, as the nonprofits and faith-based institutions, can serve as what? The fiscal lead. How many federal programs give you the opportunity to do that? Not many. And at different levels. So we have 3 levels of this program. Now I've got your ears. 3 different levels. Capacity building, that's if you're just starting out. Multi-district, meaning you can work with different districts, either across your city or across counties. And then statewide. So for those of you who are statewide organizations, you can actually apply to be statewide organizations that work across multiple districts. What are the upper levels of those grants? Capacity building, $500,000 a year for 5 years. Multi-district, up to $3 million a year for 5 years. State-based grants, up to $10 million a year for 5 years. Now, you might be saying, Elson, you're selling me a bill of goods. How are faith-based institutions really a part of this? Well, once again, you all provide the necessary services for children and families. And so this grant program is about those services, the wraparound supports, so that children can be what? Academically successful. Because oftentimes what happens with children is that those external forces prevent them from being academically successful. So those are the types of things that you all do. What do we ask as a part of this? We ask what's called the 3+2. 3 services for those children and families, and then after the 3rd year, you add 2 more. Some of those services are things like restorative justice. Some of those services are things like after-school programming. Some of those services are things like food safety. Some of those services are violence prevention. I'm not talking about things that are out of the ordinary of what you don't already do. So it's critically important that you look at this program. It will be, the RFP will be out in the spring. And once again, I can tell you, and we'll talk about this later, we've got programs in the New York State. We've got programs within Brooklyn. We've got Queens, in Auburn, the Booker T. Washington Center, and Buffalo. And last but not least, I know all day my director of the Center for Faith, Maggie Siddiqui, has been here all day. She may have stepped out, but she's another person that you all need to, there she is, so she's waving her hand. Yes, so she's been here all day with you. She's a key person that you need to talk to, not only about my programs, but other programs within the U.S. Department of Education. Thank you. Full service community schools.
Full service community
Full service
program.
community schools.
Mr. Nash, thank you so much. Very substantive. Again, cards up here. For those taking notes, follow up. Next, we're going to hear from Mr. Matthew Tejada at the Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights at the Environmental Protection Agency. Lots of new stuff going on in his office.
Yeah,
Tell us about it.
and keep your pins going. This is more money. This is more money for y'all, and I'm going to try to one-up you, but those programs are really awesome. So Matthew Tejada, I'm a career official at EPA. I've been running the EJ program for a little over 10 years. I hope to keep running it as long as I don't screw up too badly somewhere.
And we do have slides up here, folks.
There's a few slides up here. I'm going to run through them really quickly. So we have typically given out about $1 million a year at EPA in our EJ grants. $1 million a year. That is nothing in the United States for environmental justice. For the next 4 years, because of the investments we've received in our annual appropriations and through the Inflation Reduction Act, we have to give out about $3.2 billion in the next 4 years. So we've gone up about 3 orders of magnitude in our grant making very quickly. And I want to make sure you all understand the different pieces we are building right now. Some of those pieces are out on the street right now to stand up. And if we could go forward a few slides. Who's running it? I want to get to a couple more. Next one. So what we're building with this $3.2 billion over the next 4 years is a multi-phased, holistic program of providing grants and technical assistance directly to communities to make change happen on the ground for people of color communities, for indigenous communities, and low-income communities across the United States. It's going to start from assessment from those communities that are just starting out, trying to figure out what the environmental threat is, what the public health threat is, what the climate change threat is, what the economic development need is for the community. If you're just trying to figure it out, we will have technical assistance and grants to meet you at that place in your development. If you've already done that and you need to start doing that planning and project development piece, we'll have a higher level of support and assistance for you there. If you've already figured out your plan, but you need to pilot it, you need to get some support for your partners in the local government and the tribal government with the state. We're going to meet you at that phase. And coming up this summer, we'll actually have implementation grants. So if you are ready to rock and roll, if you are ready for $20 million to start turning earth and building stuff and changing conditions on the ground, we're going to have grants for you this summer so you can actually start doing implementation activities. If you go forward one slide, please. So the first thing that we have out there, it's already been competed. We're going to start announcing these in March, are our Thriving Community Technical Assistance Centers. We call them TIC-TACs. We think that's pretty smooth. So these TIC-TACs, we're going to have these TIC-TACs scattered out across the United States. These are going to be ground floor front doors for communities and their partners, like tribal organizations, like rural local governments that are really capacity constrained. If you need help incorporating a nonprofit, if you need help writing a better grant, because you keep writing that grant and you don't get the money, right? If you've gotten a grant, but you don't know how to manage it effectively, these are going to be ground floor, front door. You don't have to apply. All you have to do is call, and they will help you figure those things out. I used to apply to our grants. I used to run a community-based organization in Houston. I never got one of the grants that I administered. I tried 4 times, never got a single one, right? Because we never had help actually writing a better grant to actually get the money we needed for the communities in the Houston area. So these TIC-TACs, they're not only going to help you with that capacity building support so that your community organizations are more successful, they're going to help you navigate the federal government. There are thousands of programs out there, right? Educational programs, housing programs, transportation programs. Just at EPA, we have hundreds of programs, right? But we put the burden of navigating the federal government on the community, and it's next to impossible. It's a huge burden. So these Tic Tacs not only are going to help the community get started, they're going to understand what the community needs and say, oh, I hear you talking about contamination issues. Let's go get you a brownfield. And they're not just going to give you a brochure. They're going to take you by the hand and go introduce you to the brownfield program, right? I hear you talking about safe housing. HUD has a program ready for you, right? Let's take you by the hand and go introduce you to the folks over at HUD so HUD can start getting you the funding you need to work on that housing issue. So these Tic Tacs, we're going to announce them in March. They're going to get spun up immediately. So we hope to have these Tic Tacs actually operational, providing these supports for communities, for faith-based institutions, locally based institutions. And that's really important to understand from the EJ program at EPA. All of our programs are about community-based organizations. So as long as you're a nonprofit, you don't even have to be federally incorporated. You don't even have to be a C3, right? If you're state incorporated, there's lots of different ways to claim that nonprofit. We only fund local organizations, though. We don't fund state organizations. We don't fund national organizations. We don't fund chapters of national organizations. We fund organizations working in and with your local communities. All right, and you faith-based organizations are right in the middle of that. So these Tic Tacs are coming out soon. If we can go to the next slide. So open right now for competition are 2 of our grant competitions. One of them is our collaborative problem-solving competition. It's up to $500,000 directly for community-based organizations. As long as there is a nexus with environmental and public health issues, which is basically everything we do, right? Whether it's the health of kids in school, whether it's the access to natural resources around your communities, whether there are more dire issues needing monitoring for pollution problems or attracting economic development because of redevelopment issues, you can apply to these grants for that funding, okay? Up to $500,000. You have to be working in a collaborative partnership with other organizations, but the money goes right to you all, right? It's a grant directly to those community-based organizations. So this grant is out right now. It'll close in April. We have a series of assistance calls that we do throughout we just had one this week on our website, and you can just look for EJ Collaborative Problem Solving. We have a website with all of the assistance calls to explain what's going on, to answer any questions, to help as much as we can, since those Tic Tacs aren't operational yet, to try to help folks understand what is happening with those. We also have grants going out to local governments right now, to state governments, local governments, and tribal governments. But because of the Inflation Reduction Act, in a great way, one of the parts of the Inflation Reduction Act is that any state, any local government, any tribal government that wants part of that $3 billion, they have to partner with the community-based organization. And that doesn't just mean get that letter of support, because we all know they come and get that letter of support and you never see them again once the check starts coming, right? They're gone. You have to actually be a financial partner in their project now. That's stipulated, right? We actually have that mandate. So they actually have to sit down at the table with you and work out that budget, and you have to get a cut of the action in it. Okay, so there'll be $70 million for those government-to-government grants, but community-based organizations are going to get chunks of that as well, because those government agencies have to come in and work with the community. If we can go to the next slide real quickly. The last thing that we're doing is, this will be the big one this summer, and we're in the process. We're gonna publish a request for information very soon. We're working with our National Environmental Justice Advisory Council on it. We're designing this grant right now. This is going to be the big one. This is going to be about a $2 billion grant. This is going to be the grant that really allows you to get out there on the ground with $10 or $20 million and actually start fixing things in your community. Now, I don't want to pay for things that other people should be paying for, right? I don't want to use these EJ grants to go pull lead pipes out of the ground, because our lead pipe program just got a bunch of money through a couple other bills, right? But we all know there's that big space in between what the community needs and getting those big grants to actually come out there and pull pipes out or build housing or build transit, right? That big space in between, that's the space we're going to occupy with these grants. So these grants will be coming out this summer, but we're going to have all that planning and project development, both technical assistance in every phase, assessment, planning and project development, piloting and partnering, and then also for the reporting and evaluation of these big grants, we're not just going to be putting grants out, but we're going to have more forms of technical assistance. So if you get that planning grant, you're going to have access to planning technical assistance. So you can get experts helping you with your plan. If you get a project development grant, we're going to have experts in project development providing you technical assistance to make sure that that project development grant really hits home, right? So that you have a really effective project coming out of that project development grant. So all of this should be operational, up and available by the end of this summer. By the end of summer 2023, all of these different forms of support and all these forms of technical assistance will be available to community-based organizations across the United States. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Highly substantive. We told you we get nitty gritty. We understand Mr. Tejada has a conflict. We're running up a little again, so he wins the first question, and then we got one for Commissioner Knight. You spoke a lot about these programs and a lot of money and a lot of good examples about how everyone in this room has a chance at them. Can you make that a little tangible for us? What's a great concrete example of an environmental justice program? What can they expect to go back and turn this project into?
I mean, a lot of this for us, for all of us, for us at EPA as well as folks in the community, we've never had the opportunity to play this game, right? We've been giving out grants at like $50,000, $100,000 at a clip, and those have done all sorts of things. We've funded a lot of faith-based institutions across the United States, whether they are, working on safe drinking water for their communities, or whether they are working in schools, trying to test for whether it's asbestos or lead, and then actually trying to get their local health department to get the asbestos and lead out of their schools. We fund just regular organizing and educating of communities, right? Trying to address issues like access to health services, access to healthy food services. A lot of what we've been funding recently is actually looking at, can we use things like urban gardening or farming or other forms of flood mitigation to also start bringing in things like addressing heat islands in a lot of our urban areas, right? How can we use natural resources to both deal with climate change but also have that, multi-win option of having more healthy food options in the community and having a different economic pathway for young folk to learn another skill and be able to develop local businesses. So it's really based upon what you, the community, wants, right? We try to make our grants really broad and flexible because we want y'all to determine what the priority is, and then we come up and fund it. But this will be the first time, and this is where we really need folks' help in thinking hard about those plans and those projects. This is the first time that we're actually going to be able to fund those $10 and $20 million projects, right, and start doing real work addressing generational issues of racism and classism that have led to communities being overburdened and put upon across the United States. We're actually going to have the money to start addressing those issues now. And we all are going to be in this together and figuring out what are the best ways to do that. That's why that technical assistance piece is so critical, right? Because we need a lot of that expert help helping us figure out what are those plans and then actually implementing those plans and showing the success that using taxpayer dollars in this way is not just a good way of addressing issues, but for those really tough issues that our communities face, this is the only way to really deal with those issues, by supporting the local community, giving the community what it needs to figure out what its vision is, and then bringing the partners around, state government, local government, us, everyone else, to actually support the community in achieving that vision.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Mr. Tejada. Next one is for Commissioner Knight here. She brought up so many different things in her remarks, and we could go down a few different rabbit holes. But one that we actually heard a lot from our audience today proactively was about capital projects. And capital projects for churches and our smaller faith-based institutions, where this can often be a challenge. What can you tell us more about?
Absolutely. So in my previous roles at the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone and at Greater Jamaica Development Corporation, I had the opportunity to have lots of interaction with leadership of houses of worship around capital projects. And some of those projects were schools, some housing, workforce development centers, and other community development projects. And I want to provide a couple of pieces of advice around capital projects. Some institutions are able to go at these projects alone, and they're able to structure, fund, and get them developed by themselves. But most institutions need to partner with someone. And the one piece of advice that I will say is that before you make an agreement with a partner, call your ESD regional office and get some real estate structuring advice. Because I can't tell you how many times I've gotten calls from elected officials who say, I need you to talk to this leadership at this, house of worship. They're in trouble and it's too late. I can't give them any advice because they've already signed a partner agreement and it's terrible. It is not to the benefit of the institution. And so, we have 10 regional offices across the state. You can reach out to them and they will put you in touch with someone who will give you some advice. The other point that I want to make is that the EPA grants that you just heard about, some of those grants can be used for pre-development work that you need to do for a capital project. And so I think the beauty of a lot of the funding that's available today is that they can be layered. You have pre-development funding for things like brownfield remediation and planning. And then once you're able to get to, the construction stage, there are other grants and funding available to execute your project.
Very useful. Pro tips from the woman herself. We also have, you also mentioned minority and women-owned business enterprise certification process. There's a lot to unpack there, and we only touched on it briefly. Could you talk a little bit more?
Yes. So the state has one of the most successful women and minority business enterprise program in the country. As I said, we spend $3 billion a year on contracts that are owned by MWBEs. And ESD is the entity that provides the certification. One of the things that I would just emphasize is that when you're looking to get certified, or you have members of your congregations that are looking to get certified, they need to make sure that they have all of their documents available, so that, financial statements, legal formation documents, or anything, management agreements, anything related to the structure of the business. Because the one thing about the state's certification process is that we are very discriminating about how we certify relative to other jurisdictions. And we are certifying businesses that were intended to be certified, which is why we require so much documentation to get the certification. And we provide lots of technical assistance and support. And so I mentioned the entrepreneurial assistance centers across the state. There are 22. Any of those centers could help someone get certified. We do it in person as well as virtual now. And there are also community development financial institutions, CDFIs, that provide support for certification as well as capital. CDFIs are certified by the U.S. Treasury Department. They are mostly not-for-profit organizations, but there's some credit unions and community banks that are CDFIs. And some of those institutions will support MWBEs in their certification as well. And one other thing I'd like to mention, one of the things that happens with MWBEs in construction is that if you bid for a project and you win, you need capital to get started. You need capital to mobilize your staff. You need capital to buy materials and equipment. And the state has funded some CDFIs around across regions to provide contractor financing. So if you provide your contract to the CDFI, they will give you a loan against that contract. And we've been able to use some of the SSBCI money to do that. So that's, I think, a really unique feature that we have these days.
Absolutely is. Thank you so much, Mr. Renee. Next one's for Mr. Cohen. We heard from Mr. Nash about the sort of unique aspects of his division and how it puts the nonprofit in charge of the money. But that's not necessarily the case across other programs at DOJ. Many federal DOJ grant programs are intended for state and local governments to collaborate with community-based organizations, meaning nonprofits and CBOs are not typically the direct recipients of grant funding. Can you explain a little bit more about this and what's important to understand about the middleman here and when it comes to delivering the funds to nonprofit? Sure.
So we put out, from OJP, we put about $4 billion out last year in grants. So it's a pretty significant number. And it's broken down into both what might be called formula grants and competitive grants. And when it comes to formula grants, we have very little discretion at OJP in terms of how that goes out. Congress has said this money is intended for this purpose. Typically, it goes out based on a formula, which is why it's called a formula grant, based on population and oftentimes rate of violence or another measure like that. As long as the state comes forward with an application, it's one applicant per state, plus territories in the District of Columbia, with an application that meets the requirements. There's some work that we do in terms of monitoring good stewardship, ensuring non-discrimination use of funds, et cetera, but largely that money goes out through that formula. One big program like that is the Burn JAG program, which funds a host of things across the criminal justice system. That goes to states, and then states pass through some of that to local governments. Another one of those, though, where it gets to the middleman question is formula grants from the Office for Victims of Crime. Significant amount of money goes out to states each year, and then states subaward much of that money to local organizations for things like providing housing and victim services, for things like, housing and services for victims of crime, particularly if there's a domestic violence situation, for example, or human trafficking. You can imagine where housing is really incredibly important in order to ensure somebody's safety. You also will see states fund restorative justice programs using federal money that can then get subawarded to a local organization. But to pivot on that question just a little bit, we've rethought this a bit as well in terms of some of our competitive grants, because as I mentioned at the outset, we recognize that there are barriers to organizations being able to apply, and Matthew spoke to it as well based on his experience in Houston. Where we know it takes a lot to apply for a federal grant. There's certain infrastructure that's required. There are organizations out there with whole writing teams, grant writing teams that are applying for the same grants you might be applying for. There's a lot of reporting requirements in terms of showing how you're pulling the money each month and where it's going. And so we recognize those barriers, and a big priority for us right now is getting funding closer to the communities that are most impacted by the issues we're trying to address. There's a variety of ways that we're doing that. One method is by using an intermediary method. So we are funding some larger organizations, really with an emphasis on culturally responsive and relevant organizations that can serve as an intermediary to then subaward to smaller organizations that may not have that infrastructure in place right now, for whom those reporting requirements or that grant writing requirement might be overwhelming, but they're doing incredible work right now. And so as an intermediary organization, setting up that partnership from the outset, from our solicitation out to the street, being really explicit, this is what we expect to see, not just to get the organization funding, which is critical, we want to get the funding out to local organizations doing the work, but also to help build capacity so that in future years that organization might be able to be a direct grant recipient. We're providing some training and technical assistance in this regard as well to try to develop capacity of organizations, try to provide some insight, because I know it can be a really opaque process where you don't know what's happening behind the curtain. And so the Office for Victims of Crime has a National Center for Culturally Responsive Victim Services. And their focus is to improve access to services for victims of crime in areas that have been historically underserved, and they're also working with organizations around increasing access as well. So that's when at the outset I was talking about both the system reform on equity, but also increasing access to our grant funding, and that's a priority for us. I'll mention one more thing, which is we've also added in, starting last fiscal year, into our solicitations, priority consideration language. That means if an applicant submits an application and they say, we're going to propose X, Y, and Z project, but they also fit these priority considerations, they get extra points in the scoring process. Those priority considerations are around, are you proposing a project that advances equity? If so, be really explicit about that in your application, and that can get you extra points. Another thing that is, if it's a culturally specific organization serving a culturally specific population, that can also get you priority consideration. And so it's one way that we are trying to balance the scales a little bit and make sure that our grant funding is getting to the communities most impacted by the issues we're trying to address, and that the organizations that have really the fingers on the pulse and working directly with community members are in a position to be able to apply for this. We know that's not enough. We are continuing to try to identify and break down the barriers that prevent people from applying, but this is a start. And I think another thing that we're trying to do, actually I said I had one more thing and I've got like 3 more. So something else that we're trying to do, I'm going to make a plug, be a peer reviewer. So what happens is when organizations apply, we get those applications. If you meet the basic minimum requirements, BMR, that application then goes out to a group of people who get paid, by the way, to read those applications, score them, and send them back to us. It's called an external peer reviewer. It's to make sure there's credibility in the process, to make sure there's fairness in the process. And you know what? It's really important that the people reading those applications don't all have the same perspective. That we have people reading those applications who are like, I am familiar with the Bronx. I know it. I'm a hospital administrator. I'm a member of clergy. You name it. I've got this experience and expertise. And so when I am reading this type of grant application, whether it's a community violence intervention or a reentry services grant, you're looking at it with that perspective because that has such a significant impact on who gets grant funding. Those scores come in. It's not the only way we award grants, but it's a significant factor in determining which grants are going to be awarded. So be a peer reviewer. Go to ojp.gov, look at it, ojp.gov, and consider applying to be a peer reviewer. Again, it's incredibly important for how we distribute grants, and it's a paid opportunity. So it's not like you're just volunteering your time. It's intensive, don't get me wrong, but it's important. I had something else to say, but I got so excited about peer reviewers that I'll just stop there.
Illuminating. Thank you so much, Mr. Cohen. We are coming into the last bit of our Grants 101 portion when we have audience questions. I already see a hand right here. First one up. Reverend Blue.
I have two questions. The first question is dealing with Mrs. Knight. When you mentioned that there's a grant or you're working on something dealing with COVID. Okay. But the question is, there were a lot of churches who had vaccination sites at that church during the COVID period. And there was talk about even some reimbursement to the churches for their facilities and for their maintenance personnel to operate that. Is that a valid grant that's going to be happening? And how can churches access that? The second one is for you, Mr. Cohen. You mentioned about being peer reviewers, and you did give the website, but what other expertise would a peer reviewer need to have in order to be eligible for that type of job?
Thank you, Reverend Blue.
So I'll start. I am not sure what the budget cycle holds, which will be approved at the end of March. The Department of Health would be the entity that would be contemplating this reimbursement that you talk about. So I will stay in touch and let you know if that's something that comes to be.
So I was rapidly trying to pull up the link for the peer reviewer, and I failed there. But what I can tell you is I think there's a wide array of expertise that would qualify somebody to be a peer reviewer. It's not a one size fits all. It's not you have to have a doctorate in research related to criminal justice. That's not what we're looking for. And so I think there's an opportunity there to pull up that link. I believe there's a form that goes along with it and really identify why you're qualified to review applications in the justice space. And your work as a leader in community is a qualification in and of itself. And just being explicit about that will put you into this pool, and then individual program offices and grant programs, to just be blunt, pull from this peer reviewer pool and say, okay, we've got X type of grant. We know this is what the solicitation calls for. This person's experience really seems to be a good fit there. And so on our end, we're making the push for our colleagues when they're looking at peer review pools to be really thoughtful about what is the perspective that we really need. Who do we want looking at these grants? Because where are we trying to get these grants to go? Because what is the outcome? And so that's the perspective our staff have. And what we need is as many good perspectives into that pool in order to be able to pull from. Otherwise, we're not able to diversify our peer review pool.
Very helpful. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for all of that valuable information. I have a question for Commissioner Knight. speaking about the Minority Woman Business Enterprise Initiative, which can be a wealth building opportunity for our community. If you would be kind enough to speak to the 30% MWBE spend contractual goal, and also if you can speak to the discretionary spend of up to $1 million, which is really a game changer. And I think it would be very beneficial to business owners in our community.
Absolutely. So with respect to the 30% utilization goal, we have in-state law that all of our contracts are have to have a 30% participation by MWBEs. And so it's in statute. That is the law. And it provides an incredible opportunity for businesses that are looking for state contracts. The majority of the contracts from a capital perspective are construction contracts. And so it presents incredible opportunities for folks that are into the real estate construction trades. But there are also an array of other opportunities that people can avail themselves. The $1 million discretionary that you talk about is in place in the city. So that means that a city agency does not have to go out and solicit necessarily for a vendor if the contract's under $1 million. It's $250,000 now with New York State, and we're looking to try to raise it to $1 million, which I think will be a really incredible opportunity. So that's something that we're hoping we see that comes out of the next budget cycle.
We have time for one more quick question.
Okay, good afternoon. I would like to thank you for coming and presenting such wonderful information. I'm Barrett John Kennedy, pastor of Beth Rapha Ministries in St. Albans, Queens. Now, we've partnered a great deal with schools and done other community endeavors in the past. We've even connected with a grant writer who told us that in order to get funds, we had to establish a separate 501c3. Is that correct?
Are you currently a 501c3?
We are.
Then no, that's not correct, at least for us. The other thing in Queens, so we do have a grant. I mentioned that I was going to mention grants across New York. Zone 126. Make sure that you check them out. They're in Queens. We actually did a site visit with them in December. Make sure you check them out. They're a longtime grantee. The El Mezzi Foundation, they're connected with the El Mezzi Foundation. El Mezzi, yes. So make sure that you have the opportunity to visit them. They work with a couple of the schools in your area. The other thing for everyone else, if you go to our website, oese.ed.gov, type in full service community schools, we have the winning grants on our website. What does that mean? You can download the winning grants and get an idea on what we fund. We just funded 42 applications. So if that doesn't help you, I'm not sure what will. But if you mix that with the type of technical assistance from Matthew's agency or from Brent's agency, that's the type of collaboration that you need to be successful. So for you, definitely check out El Mezzi or Zone 126 in Queens. We also have programs in Buffalo, United Way of Buffalo, in Auburn, the Booker T. Washington Center. And then last but not least, we have Children's Aid Society in New York City. They do great work around community schools.
Perfect. And so glad you got to name check those programs in New York. We're going to conclude on what our office can do for you on grant services here. And then we'll move to our last segment, a Q&A with Senator Gillibrand. So thank you all to all of our great panelists here for the useful information they provided so far. I'd like to give a brief overview of the services that our office can provide to help you navigating the grant funding process. Regarding consultation, our office can provide free consultation on grant funding and related opportunities that may be of use to your organization. Whether you are just starting out in the world of grant funding, or you have a major project or initiative in motion already that you're seeking support for, our staff is happy to research and consult on federal opportunities that may be available. And if we're not sure, or federal funding might not be available, we can refer you to New York State grant opportunities or other ways, or people who may have an answer. The best way to get in touch with our office for consultation services is using the Grants Assistance business card included in your binder. Pull it out right now. The email address, which I'll repeat and has been repeated all day, is grants@gillibrand.senate.gov. grants@gillibrand.senate.gov. It's the best way to get in touch with our economic development staff and get the process rolling. In addition to consultation, our office produces a variety of grant funding guides on several subjects that can serve as a useful starting guide for your own grants research. For the purposes of this summit, we have put together a custom grant guide for faith-based organizations, which is included in all of your binders. Following this summit, we will also email out an electronic copy of this grant guide where all the links to various grant applications and websites will be active. These guides are not necessarily comprehensive of every grant program that may be available on a given topic, but they do serve as a good starting point to get a sense of what is out there. All our grant guides are updated regularly and hosted on the Senator's website at gillibrand.senate.gov/help/grants, which we will include a link to when we send out the electronic copy. Please don't hesitate to reach out to grants@gillibrand.senate.gov to request more grant guides. Thank you so much to everyone.